we have an incredible panel who's going to be engaging you on policy perspectives on biodiversity. And this panel will be discussing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, national biodiversity commitments, and the barriers that face policymakers. I mean, this is really important stuff. It's going to be moderated by Dr. Michael Coleman, the Senior VP, Research Networks and Academic Ambassador at Elsevier, and also former President of the International Publishers Association, where he now chairs Inclusive Publishing Literacy. Hello, Dr. Coleman. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Shola. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being part for an amazing day around biodiversity. I'm very happy to introduce my panel. We have two stellar panelists. First is Dr. Lin Li, who's a Senior Director, Global Policy and Advocacy at WWF. And then we have a renowned journalist called Daniela Chiaretti, who's also has been in the trade of journalism for, I think, more than 30 years. So welcome to both of my panelists. And I first going to ask you a very simple question, but hoping for a short answer. Can you introduce yourself? So, Lynn, I will start with you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear, yeah. Great, thank you.
I'm Lin Li. I'm working for WWF International as the Senior Director of Global Policy and Advocacy. So basically, the most recent event or the milestone event is the agreeing, as a former facilitator mentioned, of Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that is for all of society, all of government. Happy to be here, happy to share.
We're very happy to have you. And Daniela, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm a journalist. And I'm a Brazilian journalist, and I'm based in São Paulo, Brazil, and I'm covering climate and biodiversity for more than 30 years, and I'm covering the UN climate COPs and also the biodiversity ones, and traveling around, and with a big my emissions of carbon are really big, and so I try to compensate writing and talking and connecting to people and trying to say what I hear and see around the world. So thank you very much.
Well, very happy to have both of you here. And so let me start with the first question, more or less. So both policy making and storytelling are, of course, incredibly powerful when you need tools to protect biodiversity. So, Daniela, let me start with you. So why do you think storytelling and journalism is so important in this race to conserve nature?
Thank you, Misha. I think it's really important because we are losing a lot, and Lynn certainly will mention that. We are losing biodiversity. So it's very sad to think that my generation could be the last one to see a rhino, a living rhino or something. It's horrible. It's a really horrible feeling. But at the same time, I think people lost connection. People is a big word, but many people lost connection with nature. And they don't understand why this is important. So I think we have to not only communication is important, education at school, teach the little kids that this is important, and try to there is also an ethical issue on this question. That is, we don't have the right to make damages in biodiversity, in the oceans, with the animals, with the plants. I think we have a moral. We, like human beings, have also a moral issue here. So yeah, I would like to say.
Yes, and a moral obligation, right?
Exactly. Yes. Thank you very much.
That makes complete sense. And Lynn, so we talk about storytelling, but for you, of course, it's very much about policy making. So Tell us a bit more about how policy can make a big impact on biodiversity.
Sure. So we all know we're in a losing battle of getting nature back. No matter how much effort we put in, past decades, we still see declining of ecosystems. We see that the wetland, 85% of them we lost them, and we see species are in the way of extinction. We also see the pollinators, the insects, a lot of the pollinators for our food are declining. 5 million of them, are at risk of extinction. So all the trends of biodiversity is going down. While same time we see the emission of climate going up, which is totally the wrong trend. We need to see the different trend. We need the biodiversity to recover. We need carbon emission to go down. And that, from the angle of policy making, is critical, because individual organization and sometimes even individual country cannot do that. But then the government making policy, both domestic and international, need to really give the right signal for all the players in the society, be it the business, civil society, financial institutions, individual and organizations, all together need to give the fundamental shift in giving the signal of our finance system, our behavior, our food production system, so that we can bring the biodiversity back. I pause here a little bit to say biodiversity, when we mean three things. It means wildlife, species diversity, means diversity of ecosystems, that's the same as, and also the diversity of genetic materials. So that is the fundamental sustaining system. And we human beings, we cannot destroy the home, the only home we have in the universe that sustains us. And this has to be changed. While policy making has a biggest role to play, I would say.
Yes, I can imagine. And you have been actually very actively involved advising the Chinese government, right, on ecological policies. Can you mention a little bit about that? So how did it go?
Yeah. So China, from the culture, we have this 天人合一, means man and nature are one. For the past civilization, we have more than thousands of history. However, I think during the past, let's say, few decades, the nature has not been high on the people's agenda. I give you my own example. I was born in the very, very northeast of China. I was born when China's economy was very low and the living standard was very low. At that time, when I was there, it's very cold places. Nature is not something that cozy or something you look into. It's something that harsh environment you have to overcome to survive. However, in my own eyes, looking to China for the past 40 years, we see huge changes from want to conquer nature to survive to nowadays where we call it a two mountain theory. Basically means green mountain, lush water are the gold and silver for people, meaning ecological healthy and security is the foundation for a country to develop. So that huge change we see happening in China. And I think the role of international community played a lot of role, but I think eventually the Chinese and the Chinese government has played a critical role in shifting that. So they are opening to the world. There's a system called the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development. It's long. It's called CCICED, yes. Or China Council. They actually is really good mechanism. They invite about 20 to 50 of international experts on environment and development, work with the Chinese experts on environment development to provide recommendations to the Chinese government, state council, and then for the government to take on. And I have been working in China for 11 years before I coming to the international. I've seen from my own eyes how those recommendations made by international and Chinese domestic experts has been taken up by Chinese government and implement that. So that's really, I think it's a promising sign. And I see China also initiate this concept of ecological civilization. Definition is still being determined, but you can see that basically we want to have a civilization which is ecologically sound. I would say there's a lot of things we can see from China, and I'm happy with Daniela from Brazil, so we can have different perspective, which is two biggest countries in the world on biodiversity. I would say domestically, country need to do. China, Brazil, EU, all the other countries that need to be done. However, we also need to continue to think about their domestic decision would also have international impacts or implication. I give you one example. After 1998, China has a logging ban of any natural forest in China. Then that's really good for China to conserve their habitat, to really for the forest, for the retention of water, to combating the soil erosion and everything. However, what interesting happened is that when China has a logging ban on its own natural forest, the logging, because the need is still there, so logging in other parts of the world, for example, in Russia, in Africa, in Mozambique, for example, Mozambique, in African country, has increased. So therefore, I think country need also not only working on their domestic action, but also working globally. So to be very honest, in 2015, China actually put the sustainable forest management, among other issues, onto the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, we call it. So China and the African countries are working together. And I think in the Amazon is a case, maybe Daniela is going to talk more, is that for the place like Amazon, we need a country in the Amazon region to take action. At the same time, we need the country of trade or country like a resource supply chain like China or EU, who really importing a lot of soil from Brazil, which is also part of the reason for deforestation, to work together to find a way to say how a domestic country can take action at the same time to work globally on a supply chain. So this is
important, then a balance between local and global.
Definitely.
Shall we move over to Daniela, perhaps, to get a bit of the Brazilian perspective, home to lots of biodiversity?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny because in a way it's similar for China. We are both developing countries.
Yes.
So there are things that are so. One of the things is that civilization has developed cutting forests all over the world. So this is the way we know how to. Until now, we know how to get education, health, and everything. So how to change this? Let me give you an example. There is a lot of things. If it's very complicated, it's not very, but to make it simple, we have to create a new way of living. We as human beings, and to consumption and production, as Lynn has mentioned, so food production and things like that. So let me give you an example. There are many things. I was covering the COP15 in Montreal, where the global biodiversity framework was built and decided. And at the press room, there are many journalists from all around the world. And then there was an European colleague that asked it, but look, why we need 700 billions? That was the figure that was on the table at that moment from developing countries, forest countries, to preserve and develop the forest. Why we need all this money per year or something like that? It's not a matter of only leaving nature in peace. And that was so. I realized that was really a naive question, because first, the Amazon is not Central Park. The Amazon is is the biggest rainforest in the world, as big as Europe, and it's territory of biodiversity we even not know that exist. And so even for maintaining the Central Park in New York, you need $5 million per year. So in the Amazon lives 30 million persons, let's say like that, and all the indigenous communities that we have no met yet, because they don't want to meet white people, not indigenous people. So these 30 million people that lives in the Amazon, they live in some cities, others spread around. And it's a matter also of inequality. My country is really, really unequal. So we can be rich or middle class in the south and very, very poor in some other regions. And we have to deal with that.
Mm.
And so, for instance, last week, there was a big, 10 days ago, there was a big crisis in Brazil, which if I may, I can resume like that. So there is oil in the sea, in front of the Amazon and in front of the Northeast. There is oil there because French companies, English companies, they are drilling there. Other countries are drilling there. So it's a matter of find where the oil is. And so the states in the north of the Amazon and even in the Northeast, which is a very poor zone and region of my country, they wanted that. They wanted the oil. They want that because this is a way of have money
income.
and access. Yeah. Exactly. But the general agency said no. We cannot open new frontiers because there is we are living in a climate crisis and we must be coherent. It was a big crisis here in Lula's government just 10 days ago. And what is the problem, Michel, is that we are saying no to oil. Okay, we have this big crisis, but what can we offer in place of these persons that have the legitimate claim to have knowledge and health and ways of living.
Fight inequalities, yeah.
You understand? So we have to put something in place. We have to have options. We have to have good developing, good projects of sustainable developing. We have to create them because we don't know. We have some ideas. Some people are testing this all over the way, but all over the world. But I think this is also a humanity and a civilization. So it's a big challenge how to live with nature without putting damage on there and also living better. I think this is really huge for everybody. So how to change the way we produce and use things and the way we want things and we value things, because people who live in the Amazon, they don't think that the forest has any value. Cattle has value. Soya has value. So they cut it because then they will, you understand, it's a complicated issue. It's not as simple. It's not, and so, but the good thing I think is that we are discussing these things, that these ideas are being spread and more people are curious about that. And so I think this is a very good movement for the world and everything.
I could not agree more. And I think a global solution is, of course, what we all are striving for. And Daniela, you already referred to COP15. But I think, Lynn, you're also monitoring what happened there. Maybe give us your perspective on COP15. How did it go with the negotiations? What were the outcomes?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm also leading the WW delegation for the COP15, and maybe due to the COVID, COP15 made into two parts. The first part was in Kunming and second part in Montreal. That's why the agreement called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework.
A mouthful.
Yeah, very mouthful. So I will use a GBF when I'm talking about Global Biodiversity Framework. I will say a few things. First of all, this is a global biodiversity framework. That means this is not just environmental ministry's business, not just the environmental organization's business. This is the business for whole of society, for whole of government. And that's I think that's one very critical recognition we need to keep in mind. I think in during the process, there's due to COVID, there's a prolonged negotiation. There's people cannot meet, but then the negotiation online going on. Online couldn't really, play out all the negotiation needs. That people need to talk and to make compromise. So eventually, the Montreal 2 weeks of a COP and also the 1 week before was very long, intensive negotiation. But I would say the result is good. The result's good. We do have this framework that calling for halting and reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030. Remember that reverse is a critical. It's the first time we think we can and we should to bring nature back, to be nature positive, other than continue down the trend of biodiversity loss. That's critical, and that's really the landmark achievement I would call it. But that achievement cannot be made on paper. Need to make in action and also with the other agreement. So on the framework, I will say a few things we really like it. So we if you look at the target, they talk about using the inclusive, biodiversity inclusive and people inclusive spatial planning. So a country plan about their space and how they are used for development, for living, and also for conserving. And then there is a target about protecting 30% of land, water, and sea. That's really critical. And then those are, I would say, really critical. I would say those are the floor, not ceiling. So the humanity need to deliver at least those targets, 23 targets agreed by GBF, but we need to strive more to be able to live, in harmony with nature eventually. And then there are a few things, really sticky points, which take a lot of time to discuss. Finance, as Daniela mentioned at the beginning, finance is a critical issue, has been, lingering until the last minutes, which is a reason, understandably, the country we need, as Daniela mentioned, we need to finance our conservation. What happening now is that the world, the 44 trillion, half of our GDP depends on nature. However, we are putting about a $1.8 trillion of harmful subsidies, harming nature, destroying nature, while the money put in conserve nature is one magnitude lower than the 1.8 billion. And the basic thing is that our house is on fire. We put oil 10 times more than water trying to manage fire. How can that be done? So the financing is also something we need to really change, and that also the point heavily discussed. Finally, we agreed, as Daniela mentioned, that we will address the 700 billion gap for biodiversity conservation, and then parties agreed to put 200 billion by 2030 every year, and then increased ODA, 25, the 30 billion by 2030. So that is the finance topic's been there. There's one more thing we have concerns, which is that the drivers of biodiversity loss was not addressed enough. So we see biodiversity loss. There's 5 direct drivers: climate change, land use, then overexploration, pollution, and invasive species. Well, the loss, that's all because of our own footprint. Because our footprint of consumption.
All man-made.
But if we don't address that, we will not achieve reversing nature. So that is the concern. But all in all, we see a good agreement, but this only will deliver the result we like to see if a country put them into action.
Daniela, you also wrote about COP15. Anything to add here? Do you agree with all of Lynn's observations?
Yes. It was a huge battle, and Michel, I'm covering climate for a long time, and biodiversity is far way more complicated than climate. Climate, it's an incredible what Lynn was mentioning. So 23 targets. They are really complicated. They are difficult. I mean, there are gender targets, water targets, what to do with plastic, how to produce food in the world. Some things are vague because it's a new frontier of knowledge, and so we cannot know exactly. But it puts the right direction, and it was very important. And there were political battles and north and south battles in some ways, as Lynn mentioned, until the last second forest countries weren't happy. It's not only about money. Let me put it very clear. It's also about money, but it's not only about money. It's the way we do. So let's think about plastic in the seas. And there is another discussion in the world now for a new treaty or something. So how can we live without plastic? We have to. How can we reuse? How can we recycle? What kind of plastics are really important? We have to have it for a long time. So if we look around us now, we are surrounded of plastic everywhere, and we know that all this plastic is going to the sea. And there are some scenarios that say that in a few years we are going to have more plastic than fishes in the sea. And we have plastic in our blood now, in the milk. So
microparticles.
Exactly. This is only one aspect of all this thing. So I think I was happy to have this global framework at the end, because this puts everybody in the same direction. But this is only the beginning. The battle starts now with the implementation, how to do it, and where to do it, how to start, and everything. So, but I'm again optimistic that we should have more awareness of people. We should try to explain to people in a more sensitive and easy way why this is important. We should to put this story closer to people at home. This is an effort I'm doing, my colleague journalists are doing also. It's, as Lynn has said, it's not only a matter of governments, and society must put pressure to change things, because we have to change things. If I may, I want to add one or two small things. One is I am very lucky with my work, because I travel around and I see a lot of interesting things, and I interview interesting persons. And I was in Nairobi some years ago. There was one of these big meeting of environment where the plastic treaty started, the idea and so on. And somebody offered me if I wanted to interview the first astronaut, the first women astronaut that went to the space. And it was an American, and she's a legend. And I wasn't prepared, and I said, yeah, I want to talk to her. And so I went there, and in these 5 minutes, I was thinking, oh my God, what should I ask? Not to be stupid, and to ask how is to be a woman in a male world, something that. No. So I was thinking, and I said, listen, thank you very much, but you have seen our planet from the window. So do you think we are going to survive as human beings? And she looked at me. Really, I felt very bad, because I thought, oh no, I've done a very stupid question. And she looked at me, and she was irritated, and she said, what an arrogant question you're doing. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And she said, the planet will survive, but we as earthlings, is this the correct words?
Yes, as humans, earthlings,
exactly.
Creatures living on Earth, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It was the first time somebody told me I'm an earthling. This was a science fiction thing for movies and everything. And so I felt like that. And I said, we have to think as if we are going to survive, because the planet is going to survive. It's our challenge. And so this is what biodiversity means, and climate. It's surviving. And well, we can do it. Let's work and try, but we have a lot to do.
And so, you mentioned climate before, and you actually, Daniela, said climate is a bit easier, or maybe Lynn, you said that as well. But of course, we can reduce the climate discussion to carbon reduction. And there are great initiatives there, for instance, science-based targets for climate. And now, of course, there's a parallel development in biodiversity, so science-based targets for nature. What are your views on that?
Me?
Maybe start with Daniela, yes.
Okay. Well, you know, the board, we need metrics and indicators to get somewhere.
Yeah.
We work like that with metrics and indicators, and it's very complicated. So they are starting to put targets and indicators and metrics to everything to see if this is a good way to get there somehow. And so there are things that are very fascinating. So in Brazil, in the Northeast, if you see a jaguar in a very in a almost desertic biome, and there are jaguars there, and this is an indicator that biodiversity is doing well, because he's the last. The jaguar is a very big animal. He needs a lot to survive, and
large territorium. Yeah.
Exactly, and a lot of biodiversity to eat. And so if the jaguar is there, the biome is more or less healthy. This is an indicator. I'm putting in a but there are many
in the coal pit.
Exactly. So Lynn mentioned bees. Bees is something that everybody understands now, that you need
pollinators,
the pollinators and everything. This is another indicator. But how can you put a metric in the sea to see if the ocean is healthy or not? This is more complicated. And then, so how can you see that? So scientists are building on that, and they are making a lot of progress, indeed. And so for companies and business, because they are very important in this thing, and Lynn mentioned all the finance of the world system of financing that has to shift for a decarbonization model and a biodiversity safe model. And this is we have to change. This is we have to change. We have to try to, and it's difficult to change habits. We know that, yes. And so but we must do it. And then this is my key message. I think we have to change. We have to be humble to change. We have to listen to the others, indigenous people, communities, other countries. And this is complicated. We saw in COVID, during COVID, we saw a bit of this, as the world cannot communicate well. And in a COVID problem, we saw some people reacting against science, and we saw some people reacting against other people. And we saw inequality was an issue in a country as Brazil. It was a big issue. Yeah. And awareness and education. So all these things, climate, the crisis, the triple crisis we are living, climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, they are getting worse, and they put the poor people and vulnerable people in a worse situation because they don't have a lot of resources.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned metrics, because elsewhere we issued a report on International Biodiversity Day on biodiversity research. So what is being done in the area of research on biodiversity? And it was a bit surprising. So for instance, in my own country, in the Netherlands, we have a pretty bad track record on biodiversity because of urbanization and agriculture. There's not much left of biodiversity, but we're really champion of biodiversity research. For instance, the University of Wageningen is like in the top 10. What we also saw that some countries are doing much more research on biodiversity than you would expect from their overall contribution. And notably, there's Brazil, there's Mexico, there's South Africa. So, and I think kudos to those countries that they do so well, that they spend so much of their investment in research on biodiversity. And the University of São Paulo, I think that's where you are, right, Daniela, is an absolute leader. It made the top 10 of universities contributing to biodiversity. So I thought I would just chip in some of the data from a recent Elsevier report. Lynn, so what is your view on getting better metrics and a more science-based approach to nature, so to say?
Sure. So we cannot manage what we cannot measure, what we don't measure. So there's many metrics. One of them, I would call it Living Planet Index, which really tracking the relative abundance of the species population. And there's also many others, like the biodiversity intactness, the red list of adult extinction. So we need to measure, like Daniela mentioned, something like a jaguar to give us indication how the ecosystem are healthy or not. And that for them, for the other wildlife, also for a human being. So the metrics are there and they need to be measured. I think the same thing also applies to business as well. So business sector is a really critical sector in using the materials from nature and then provide goods for people, but at the same time, their impact in the footprint on the ground is quite heavy. So we see quite good movement from business sector. I give you two examples. One is the science-based targets network, starting from climate, SBTN on climate, but then they are also working on science-based targets for nature. So I think this is one good sign that we see businesses are taking responsibility to measure the impact. At the same time, we see the task force for nature-related financial disclosure, also from finance sector to talk about finance sector and also business to do that. Those are good signs. Then I also wanted to share one more thing I observed with my own eyes on business advocacy at the global stage. In Montreal, when the CBD have a COPs, it is, so you see, business usually become the interest wanted to have a less regulation, have a more freedom. But it's the first time in front of my own eyes, I saw led by Business for Nature, which is a business coalition and also Nature Capital Coalition and World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And they are calling for more stringent requirement for companies to disclose. And that's, they got gained applaud from the room. And so the result is that we have on the target 15 in the global biodiversity framework, require large business to assess, disclose their risk and the dependence and also impact on nature. So this is a good starting point that we are asking business to take the responsibility of manage and disclose and manage their impact to nature. I think this, they can measure and then they disclose and then they have people like government, like us, civil society, to watch, to hold them accountable to deliver what they are setting to deliver. So I see the good signs, a good movement is starting now.
Excellent. We are almost run out of time, but I do want to give you the floor for maybe the one final short message. So what would you advise, anybody, the citizens out there who are watching this, what can they do, the individuals around biodiversity in a two-liner? Daniela, maybe you can go first.
Okay, in two-liners. So it's about choices, the daily choices we are doing every day. So to think about it, this is the start. Think about it. Yeah. And then try to make good choices. But I also think it's not fair only to put in the shoulders of people. The government must put the policies to private sector for us to understand where to go. So and we have to put more pressure on governments to move. And so, but yes, one thing is about choices. Try to read and learn, and it's a fascinating subject. I think we are going to listen to Dr. Jane Goodall in some minutes. This is fascinating.
I know. And Dr. Lee, so what is your two-liner for individuals who are listening
Sure.
and want to contribute to biodiversity?
Sure. I fully agree with Daniela. Choice. First of all, it's a choice. Individual, you can make choice. I think Dr. Goodall, we're gonna hear, she once said, we have to stop thinking that we can have unlimited economic development on the planet with a finite natural resources. So that is a choice we have to make as individual, as organization. But for the individual, I have another, I think, call to action. In addition to choice, the others are call to action. Call for business, call for government, call for the government to change the economic model so we can give the right signals to the market so that we're stopping to trash the planet we're on, but also rebuild, bring more nature back, bring more nature for the future generation to go. So they can do themselves. They can also join the call to action of government and business. I want to quote UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' words.
Perfect. Let's finish up with a quote.
Just one thing. Yeah, he said, without nature, we have nothing. And without nature, we are nothing. So nature is for all of us.
Beautiful way to end. Thank you so much. Daniela, for the very last word. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary, he also said that we cannot negotiate with nature. So I think this is also important.
Perfect. Thank you so much.